Okay, greetings and salutations. Happy Memorial Day to everyone. I am an alcoholic. My name is Bill. Welcome to another amazing meeting, non-affiliated, of a Design for Living, where we study and love the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous because it gives us precise instruction on how to recover from what seemed to be a hopeless state of mind and body. And although this book was had specific with alcoholism, we found out that any spiritual malady can be remedied with these spiritual principles. So I and Elizabeth are here. We have Emily joining us. I have an announcement. I waited till everyone was present. I will be releasing or relinquishing or turning over my responsibilities to Miss Emily, who was next in line, as I have done this for a year and a half. And then Rob will use me any and everywhere that he needs me if someone needs to fill in. But some things are changing in my life now. It has been an honor and a privilege to be of service and to be affiliated and a part of this group. But like I said, I didn't want to tell one without telling everyone. It's pretty simple. Now they can hear it all over the world. That's to say, if anyone listens to it. Elizabeth, please come in and say hello. And if you want, you can start today. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. My name is Elizabeth. I'm an alcoholic, and today we are on page 9 of Bill's story. See, I was aghast. So that was it. So he's just met with Ebby, and Ebby says, I've got religion. He says, I was aghast. So that was it. Last summer, an alcoholic crackpot. Now I suspected a little cracked about religion. He had that starry-eyed look. Yes, the old boy was on fire, all right, but bless his heart, let him rant. Besides, my gin would last longer than his preaching. But he did no ranting. In a matter-of-fact way, he told how 2 men had appeared in court, persuading the judge to suspend his commitment. They had told of a simple religious idea and a practical program of action. That was 2 months ago, and the result was self-evident. It worked. And there again, as I always like to point out, the repetition of that idea and action, over and over and over. They tell us that we need both. He had come to pass his experience along to me, if I cared to have it. And another point that we don't shove it down anyone's throats, right? We say, this is what I did. If you want it, here's what I did. I was shocked but interested. Certainly I was interested. I had to be, for I was hopeless. And I love that. I'm going to stop there for a second because, you know, I see a lot of people giving advice in this program, and I see a lot of people, and I'm guilty of it too. Like sometimes I forget to qualify myself, and it's hard to remember. I mean, it's been a long time since I was in early sobriety, but I want to connect with people and make them know, like, I've been where you've been, you know, and I get so inspired by new people that when they share of themselves, and it reminds me of when I was in their place, you know, like I remember exactly where I lived, how it was a complete emotional basket case, like especially when the feelings came back, right? But, you know, holding on to the spiritual ideal and the program of action for me has worked, but I don't want to hear about it until I'm hopeless. And that's the other thing, you know, when people go do this recover out loud stuff, they need to remember that they might be creating a barrier for entry for people, you know, and when we talk about the 11th tradition, our public relations policy, because people don't want to know about this until they need to know. You watch their attitudes change, you know, when they're hopeless and they want a solution, then they start asking questions. And then we talk about ourselves. You know, I get so excited about recovery. Sometimes I just want to talk about recovery and just start blasting somebody with everything I've learned. And I probably did it to Christina one time. She's in here. When I first met her, I was so excited. I was like, I want to tell you everything that I didn't understand about recovery for the first 32 years of recovery that I learned in the last 5, you know, but just sharing our stories, like we find out what we have in common, and it really helps somebody say, wait a minute, this person has what I have, you know, and we don't talk from a spiritual mountaintop, and we don't talk down to people, and we don't tell them what to do, and we keep it in the I statements and share what happened for me. Because if you try to tell an alcoholic what to do or what they should do, I mean, what's the first thing they're going to do? The opposite, right? They don't want to hear it. And I just like how it points that out, you know, if you care to have it, here's what I did. And that's what I tell people. I say, AA worked for me. You know, if you're struggling, you can try what I tried. I come here almost every single day. I try to help people every single day. I stay current with my step work and my prayer meditation and my inventory. And you know, I have a strong sponsorship, and that's what I did, and it worked. You know, it's working. If you want to try it, you can do it too. You want to say anything about that, Bill? Or Emily? Or is Emily co-chairing today? Are you?
I'm
Go
taking
for
over.
it.
Emily Alcoholic. I do like this part in the book. You know, it just brings it back to when I first came in. You know, I walked into the rooms of AA when I was 12, and I've been in and out. I never got serious until I was like 24. But I could just see like the bright eyes of everyone in the rooms, um, and how it just, you know, completely changed their lives. And I just did not believe it until I understood it. You know, I had to hit rock bottom before I could even, you know, begin to understand, you know, oh, well, I'm so happy, joyous, and free. But it's like, why? You know, until you walk in the rooms and you see what they do. And, you know, when I got my sponsor, you know, she pretty much just told me, you know, do what I do and you will understand. So I did exactly what my sponsor told me to do. I did the 12 steps. You know, I sponsor other women. I take on a lot of service commitments. And I know Bill did not understand that back in the day. Me, I only understood a little bit, but of course, they didn't have the program that we have now these days. But, you know, today we just can be an example for other people, especially newcomers. I like to bring the attention to page 10 where it says, I was shocked but interested. Certainly, I was interested. I had to be, for I was hopeless. You know, when I came in, I was 100% hopeless. You know, I didn't know what to do. You know, I came in and I was desperate. You know, honestly, I wanted to die. And that wasn't until I decided that when I had hit rock bottom, like I just completely involved myself into the program and gave it my all. And you know, today that has absolutely been my experience. And today, you know, next month I'll be celebrating an anniversary, and you know, that's only through God. And you guys, you know, it's a we program, it's not an I program. And you know, I just thank God for that, because I could not do that for myself. You know, God can only do what, you know, what we cannot do for ourselves. And you know, that has been my experience, and I see that through these rooms and just any meeting that I go through. You know, there is hope as long as we want to accept it and do what, you know, we're told to do. Um, that's all I have, but I'll read the next paragraph or two. Um, he talked for hours. Childhood memories rose before me. I could almost hear the sound of the preacher's voice as I sat on still Sundays. Way over there on the hillside, there was that preferred temperance pledge I never signed, my grandfather's good natured contempt of some good church folk and their doings, his insistence that the Spears really had their music, his denial of the preacher's right to tell him how he must listen, his fearlessness as he spoke of these things just before he died. These recollections welled up from the past that made me swallow hard. That wartime day in old Winchester Cathedral came back again. I had always believed in a power greater than myself. I had often pondered these things. I was not an atheist. Few people really are, for that means blind faith in the strange proposition that this universe originated in a cipher and aimlessly rushes nowhere. My intellectual heroes, the chemists, the astronomers, even the evolutionists, suggested vast laws and forces at work. Despite contrary indications, I had little doubt that a mighty purpose and rhythm underlay all. How could there be so much of precise and immutable law and no intelligence? I simply had to believe in a spirit of the universe who knew neither time nor limitation, but that was as far as I had gone. You know, again, that just kind of brings me back to when I first came in. You know, all I had to do was be open minded and willing and just believing in a power greater than myself. I could not stay sober to save my life. You know, I started drinking really young. I was like 7, and I just could not stop drinking and using. without some kind of God in my life to intervene. And that's just very prevalent to me. When I first read Bill's story, I was like, this has nothing to do with me. I'm not in a war. And, I didn't go to England and see Winchester Cathedral and all that. But as we read it and we understand it, and as we progress in our sobriety, I just see that this is more prevalent to me in my life today. And I just see different things as much as I read this chapter every day. So that's all I have for right now. Thank you.
Thanks, Emily. That was awesome. I love this part where he says, talking about his grandfather, that the spheres really had their music, but his denial of the preacher's right to tell him how he must listen. And then thinking about that, he said, it made me swallow hard. And I really notice a change in people when they're ready for help. That little moment where I stop running, and I start feeling and really being present with myself. I think about him, because when I think about my grandparents, I was just talking about a road trip to where my grandparents used to live, and I get really emotional thinking about them. And I know Bill spent a lot of time with his grandfather, right, Bill? I think his grandparents, I'm not the huge history buff around here, but I don't like to be told how I must listen. And that's one of the things I really love about AA. And I like how at the bottom it says, at the last thing that Emily read, I simply had to believe in a spirit of the universe, and everything that's capitalized. If you're, looking at the book, you'll see that he uses different phrases to describe that spirit. But he says, but that's as far as I had gone. And so, I meet a lot of people that come in here and they have spiritual beliefs, but they're not using that at all. They don't have any reliance on that spiritual belief. They are not using that in their lives. It's like they got the 1 hour on Sunday, and that's it. Well, that's great, but it's not helping you, right? That's what Dr. Bob had too. He had strong religious beliefs, but he wasn't using them to help him. And I even tell people that are agnostic, like, when I turn away from what Elizabeth asked God in her life, and I turn towards, some idea. I don't even know the face of my God today. I mean, I kind of have some ideas, but I don't talk about it a lot. But when I do that, something changes in me. I'm on a different track. I'm on a different footing, as they're going to talk about, of course, a lot. And what happens, there's a transformation, something inside me, and I can have that any time of the day. Any time of the day, I can say, nope, I'm going to shut off that other switch, which is usually my brain coming up with a million different things that I got to think about and do and plan and solve. And then I go, nope, all right, God, what do you got for me today? What are we doing right now? And something changes, and I can be more present. It's beautiful. Let me see. You want me to read some, or do you got any more?
No, that's all. You can read.
Okay, so we're at the bottom of page 10 now. With ministers and the world's religions, I parted right there. When they talked of a God personal to me, who was love, superhuman strength and direction, I became irritated, and my mind snapped shut against such theory. To Christ I conceded the certainty of a great man, not too closely followed by those who claimed him. His moral teaching, most excellent. For myself, I had adopted those parts which seemed convenient and not too difficult. The rest I disregarded. The wars that had been fought, the burnings and chicanery that religious dispute had facilitated. Sorry, Emily, I'm right at the edge of needing readers for this big book. Made me sick. I honestly doubted whether on balance the religions of mankind had done any good. Judging from what I had seen in Europe and since, the power of God in human affairs was negligible. The brotherhood of man a grim jest. If there was a devil, he seemed the boss universal. And he certainly had me. And I can really relate to this because we have some people in my family that really use their religion to control others and condemn them. And, saying that they're going to be saved. So it's almost like an excuse for them to act badly, you can't, you're not going to be perfect. And just anyway. And I remember how important it is that I have an open mind. Because if I'm desperate enough to try a new way of life and have an open mind, then I'm going to have an experience that I didn't have before. And that has happened for me. But I still have to admit that sometimes I bristle. I love our 12 traditions, and I'm still learning about how to apply them. I'm not an expert or anything. But I get confused about some of those issues too, because, and I have to watch out for my own bias because it's really important, I know the groups that talk more about religion and I know, I suggest them to people sometimes like, hey, you might like this group, but, I know I need to work on having an open mind more because of this, You got anything on that, or do you want to read?
I got a few things. I love how this is not a religious program. Religion was really like big in my family, and I'm just glad that this is a spiritual program instead because, the God I knew was just, he was bad. Very punishable. But I love that this is spiritual because I can make my own conception of God, and just being able to have that open mindedness and choosing the God that I want that works for me in my life is definitely helpful for me because I kind of was like Bill, like I wanted to shut God out, and when I came in, because I'm like, what the heck did God do for me, but I just like that he had that experience, and so did I. That just keeps me very open and willing, and being able to show other people that are very similar to me that grew up in religious backgrounds as well that it is possible. We don't have to just believe in Muhammad or Jesus or any of that. We could believe in anything that we want, and as long as that works for us, then that is what keeps us sober. I'll read the next paragraph or two.
Oh, and Bill just let us know he'd like to share some. Bill, he let me know in chat. You want to share some on what we've been reading? Sorry, didn't mean to leave you out.
Actually, yeah, I mean, you two are transitioning. I felt like, oh my God, the divorce wasn't even, the ink wasn't dry and they're often married, and that's okay. But I did want to say something about the first reading. This would be now what become what Ebby did with Bill as a 12-step call. Ebby, being the sober alcoholic, called on Bill, being the drunken alcoholic or the drinking alcoholic, one under the influence at the time. And he said in a very matter-of-fact way, he didn't talk to Bill about Bill's drinking. He didn't tell Bill what he needed to do. He didn't give him an apostolic lecture on that Bill needed to find God. Ebby told Bill what happened with Ebby. And I think even most emphatically that's important is when the two men from the Oxford group, and we can get into that, Rob's going to put some stuff in there, I know. When they showed up in court, they weren't giving Ebby a character reference. They were persuading the judge to release them to them based on their experience. It's interesting. Sometimes people come in here and say, I'm going to get a whole bunch of character reference letters from the people in AA and all my friends. I mean, the crime that you committed speaks a lot louder than anything I can say about you in 90 days. But they went to court and told the judge, we think we have a solution to a problem that we've identified that our good friend Ebby probably has, because he's a lot like us and we're not like that anymore. So it's just real interesting to know. And guess what? Alcoholics Anonymous, although we do not affiliate with anyone or anything, really stands on that. You know how many the courts, they don't go along with this, but they'll send a lot of people here rather than prison. And they can't make us go, obviously. The guy came in one day and said, I'm not never coming back to this meeting. My sponsor said, why is that? He said, this is too long, this meeting. My sponsor said, you don't have to come. He said, yeah, I do. If I don't, I'll go to jail. And Larry said to him, you have options. But the reality is they cannot make you come here. But again, it goes back to what we're going to read in We Agnostics without knowing it. In other words, we had nothing to do with, we had been brought or guided to where we stood by a certain kind of faith. And I think it's amazing. That's probably all I'm going to say today. I was just feeling separation anxiety when you guys clicked right over me as if I no longer existed.
Thanks, Bill.
All right, Emily, alcoholic. So my friend sat before me. He made the point blank declaration that God had done for him what he could not do for himself. His human will had failed. Doctors had pronounced him incurable. Society was about to lock him up. and himself, he had made a complete defeat. Then he had in effect been raised from the dead, suddenly taken from the scrap heap to a level of life before the best he had ever known. Had this power originated in him? Obviously, it had not. There had been more, there had been no more power in him than there was in me at that moment, and this was none at all. Um, yeah, that just when I came into right before I came into the program and knew about AA, I had been locked up into institutions as well. I had a lot of mental health problems, and all they want to do with us alcoholics is just lock us up and think that is the solution, when really, all we need is just, a higher power of our understanding, and just other people like us that understand exactly what we're going through. And, as long as we're willing and able to change, then, we are able to become changed human beings, as long as we're willing and able to. And yeah, I just don't like how they think that authorities, is the answer for us. Yes, we make mistakes, and sometimes we can commit, crimes and stuff, but sometimes that's just above even them, because they're humans as well, and they're not experts. And yeah, I just like how God is the answer for everything. It's not just something that we pick and choose from like a buffet. It's God is everything, or He is not. So in our lives. So I think that definitely is pretty relevant today. Even though this book was written back in the 30s, just how we look at it in our lives. So that's all I have for now.
Thanks, Emily. You pointed out something exactly that I was going to suggest. So anybody in here who feels like they might be on the agnostic spectrum of things, remember that statement on page 53, which Emily just mentioned. After it says God is everything or else He is nothing, it says, what is our choice to be? And one of the things I think about when I read anything about turning to God is, when I do that, I have a different experience. It's almost like a softening of my heart, or a slowing down of my, reaction to life, that allows me to be present and to look for, I look for God in my life. I look for the God showing up. And one of the first things that I got to see was the fact that I drove in blackouts all the time. I shouldn't even be alive. I mean, it's amazing. Something kept me safe. Or the fact that I talked to my father, who led me to AA. I wasn't talking to him regularly at the time. I was in college. I lived with my mom when I was at home. It's a miracle that I talked to him that day, and he led me, through the back door through Al-Anon. Emily doesn't know my story yet, but I kind of got here by accident through one Al-Anon meeting, before I realized I might need to be across the hall. But I really love, again, he's talking about, Ebby is telling his story. He's saying this is what happened, and he emphasized the fact that his human will failed, which back in the 30s, they're still fighting against the idea that these people have some sort of moral failing, that they can't have willpower. Like, we have a lot more knowledge today, but still, I run around in these Facebook groups where people haven't even maybe necessarily made it to a meeting yet, and they're posting stuff in there, and they're so confused, and they can't understand why they can't stop drinking. They've tried and tried and tried, they're trying to use their willpower. And I wonder if Bill felt great relief when he first heard, wait a minute, just like I did. Wait, I'm not the only one. I've been trying to do this, and it's not working. And wait a minute, I'm such a capable person everywhere else in my life. How come I can't make it work here, right? Which we hear more about in the stories in chapter 3. But what relief he must have felt, when he first heard that. Hold on a second. And now he's saying, yeah, I'm just like you. And now I'm having an amazing life, Do you want me to read that? Floored me?
Yeah.
Okay. Is that right?
Yes, correct.
Right. That floored me. Oh, and wait, and then he says, and this was none at all. He had no power. And that recognition, I find, is really important to see, wait a minute. And one thing that was different for me coming through the book was I started studying it at 14 years sober. And my sponsor focused on how I was unmanageable at the time. She said, you need to have a new experience. And I was 14 years away from alcohol. I needed to get to a place of complete defeat with the second half of step one to see why I needed God, right? The book I have heard was written, this book was written with keeping in mind a lot of the low bottom drunks. They have already tried all this stuff. Nothing worked, right? It says, if you've tried other things and they didn't work, we have something for you. And she emphasized, because, and I'm so glad she did, because now I know how to go through the book on pretty much everything. You know, I don't have to just think about drinking when I go through the book. I think about how I think, how I try to manage my husband all the time, who gets the worst of me, right? The best and the worst. But, you know, people have to get to that point. And when I take women through the book, and one of them's in here now, you know, I usually get the God players that need to go kind of slow and really look at themselves and how they act in their lives to get to the point where they say, wait a minute, this isn't working. Just like my sponsor did with me, to see that, because I'm good at seeing where it's working for me, right? I think I have power. And every time I do something and it works, I think, great, Elizabeth can be God. That's great. I have to get to the place where I see, wait a minute, the reality is I'm stepping on toes. Nobody wants to be around me. Nobody wants to invite me anywhere. Like I have to really see that. And guess what? It's painful. You know, it's not fun. AA is like just repeated ego death, I think. And I'm like, that's what it is, right? Anyway, he says, this floored me. It began to look as though religious people were right after all. Here was something at work in a human heart which had done the impossible. My ideas about miracles were drastically revised right then. Never mind the musty past. Here sat a miracle directly across the kitchen table. He shouted great tidings. I saw that my friend was much more than inwardly reorganized. He was on a different footing. His roots grasped a new soil. And I really start to get goosebumps around this point, because, you know, this isn't us patching up the potholes in the road of our lives. This is walking on a new road. And, you know, I emphasize that to people over and over again. When he says this is at work in the human heart, which has done the impossible, right? And I keep talking about something changes when I turn to God and say, you know, help me, show me how you want me to be today. Because I got all kinds of defects, right? I want to be Miss Know-It-All. I don't want to be nice to people who bully me. I don't want to be, you know, and I have stories about that and amazing things that happened. We're at the top of page 12. We just got to the top of page 12. And I'm walking a new road, and I really emphasize that to people. We have to look at how our old ways don't work, because we're not trying to improve on the old ways. We're trying to do something completely different. You want me to do a little more reading, and then we can turn it over to you, Emily?
I'll share real fast.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely I like the sentence here where it says, my ideas about miracles were drastically revised right then. Never mind the musty past. Here sat a miracle across the kitchen table from me. He shouted great tidings. Yeah. That's kind of how I look at it in my life today. My parents are still active alcoholics. And when I sit in the room and I sit across the kitchen table from them, sometimes when I go visit them, it just reminds me that I am, the miracle that, God saved me, because I should be also dead. I also did drive in blackouts, and it took me 3 times of flipping my car in a ditch before I got my life together. And, I definitely think that was definitely a God intervention for sure, because I would not be sitting here. And, I'm just so grateful for that. I'll pick up the next paragraph or two. Despite the living example of my friend, there remained in me the vestiges of my old prejudice. The word God still roused a certain antipathy. When the thought was expressed that there might be a God personal to me, this feeling was intensified. I didn't like the idea I could go for such conceptions as creative intelligence, universal mind, or spirit of nature, that I resisted the thought of a Sawer of the heavens, however loving his sway might be. I have since talked with scores of men who felt the same way. A friend suggested What then seemed a novel idea, he said, and this is in italics, why don't you choose your own conception of God? This statement hit me hard. It melted the icy intellectual mountain in whose shadow I had lived and shivered many years. I stood in the sunlight at last. Yeah, I definitely like how they use different perceptions of a god of our understanding, and they capitalize them because they want us to realize that there is more than one different way of a conception of God for sure. And I just think that Bill was brilliant when he was able to realize that. And then when Ebby had mentioned, why don't you choose your own conception of God, like that like to me that was just like amazing, because I didn't want to use just God or any other God. I definitely wanted to have an open mind, and I love how open that this program is again, it's not religion, it's spiritual. And I today really do think that I am definitely a spiritual being, and that's what has helped me in this program, to be open to that, and this and help other people realize that it's not just about religion. Because I know when I first came in, newcomers don't want to hear, oh well, God and this and the step, and God that, and I feel like that can turn some people off for sure. But as long as they're open to believing any conception, then it definitely is possible. And as we grow through the program, like our conception of God can definitely change, because I know in the few couple of years that I've had, my God has definitely changed as well, and the aspect that I look at him to this day. So I definitely love this part of the book, because it just makes me realize that this is where I was at, almost 5 years ago. So it's just a good constant reminder of that. That's all I have.
Thanks, Emily. I'm going to point out in the book, for those that are listening, he does capitalize where he says creative intelligence, universal mind, or spirit of nature. And I love how he points that out. And when he says it melted the icy intellectual mountain in whose shadow I had lived and shivered many years. I just love the language, the writing in this part of the book. I mean, this is a stockbroker writing this. It just cracks me up to think about, this other aspect of Bill. And when I've learned a little bit about the writing of this book, I always wonder, there were times they were homeless during the writing of the book and sleeping on other people's couches. And I sometimes wonder if the best parts weren't when they were struggling the most, because he had to get inspired and was working so hard on it. And I know that there was one of the things I really love, I don't like to delve too far into the history myself. I know we have a historian in the room because I'm looking at him right now, but because I don't want to be influenced about, like my sponsor emphasized, that we read this book and we find out how it applies to my personal recovery. And, there's some things I guess I don't really want to know, but one thing I really appreciate is that there were influences when writing the book of how much they put God, just the word God, and these other words. And I appreciate the influence that said, wait a minute, we need to open this up, because they were coming out of a very strong group called the Oxford Group, which was Christian. And they wanted to make sure that all alcoholics felt, like they belonged and they were safe in this program. And that's why they wanted to open it up. And I tend to get, I have all kinds. I definitely have people that are religious that I work with, but I also get people who aren't. And I like to point out, they're trying to be open here. This is more about how I'm using it in my life, right? That's the important part. Whatever you believe is fine, but are you using it, or are you still playing your own God? But that icy intellectual mountain, I just always get a feeling when I read that, because that was me. I was like a little adult by age 5, you could argue, right? My parents weren't around. So I learned how to take care of myself and my little sister all my life. I became very self-reliant, but it was lonely, because I was one of the ones saying, hey, here's the family problem, everybody. And everyone's like, well, you're crazy. There's no family problem. And then I come to AA and I hear everyone talking about how they feel for the first time. I never heard people admitting to fear, insecurity, none of that stuff. And And when I first came to AA, if you said, Elizabeth, how do you feel? I'd tell you what I think. I'd start with, I think that, right? I had no ability to connect with even myself. So when I hear that, it's like, wow. And then, oh, should we go with it was only a matter? You want me to read that?
Mhm.
Okay. So we're on page 12 again, and we'll open up for questions here in about what, at 45? Good for you? Is that good?
Yeah, that's good.
All right. I ask questions because I'm a guest here. I'm a little new to this format. So here we have some italics. So I always say that three times to pay attention, even more in the book. And the italics were more expensive then. So when they put stuff in italics, pay attention. When they use strong words like, you know, permanent and strenuous and all that, pay attention. And when they repeat stuff constantly, pay attention. And this says, it was only a matter of being willing to believe in a power greater than myself. Nothing more was required of me to make my beginning. I saw that growth could start from that point. Upon a foundation of complete willingness, I might build what I saw in my friend. Would I have it? Of course I would. And I like to point out to people where it says being willing, nothing more was required. And that's because when I came in here, I was a little perfectionist, and I need to understand God before I can get past step 3, right? I think I need to have all this down perfectly. I remember being 3 months sober and wishing I was a year sober and wanting to impress everybody and know what I'm doing, you know, and I just try to encourage people, like, just let it unfold. This is not a sprint. This is a marathon, you know, and it's okay. You know, just be open to this process. I've had people struggle and hate this all the way up through step 3, you know, and I'm like, oh, I got to get them to chapter 5, you know. They're living in pages 60 to 63 and they don't even know it yet, you know. It's like and just trying and but I love this. It's probably the toughest one for some people that I've worked with and for myself to just say, okay, fine. I don't need to know what's going to happen. I'm just going to do this and see what happens, you know, and I just always keep encouraging people to do that. And then he says, I might build what I saw in my friend. Would I have it? Of course I would. That my first higher power was AA. Everybody seemed like they were having a nice time with themselves. You know, they all seemed to have confidence and something had changed for them. And so I wanted what they had. I wanted what my sponsor had. I did what she did. And that's what I tell people. If you want what I have, do what I do, and I'll show you what I do. You know, and I do take the actions of this program. Go ahead, Emily.
There's a sentence here that I have overlooked for years. It says, scales of pride and prejudice fell from my eyes, a new world came into view. You know, I in the past was like very like prideful.
Oh, I didn't read that yet. Go ahead and read that.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Thus I was convinced that God is concerned with us when we want him enough. At long last, I felt, I believe, scales of pride and prejudice fell from my eyes. A new world came into view. Anyway, as I was saying, I overlooked those two sentences for like years because you know, I was very prideful and egotistical, for sure. You know, I was just like, oh, I'm never going to stop drinking, and who are you to say that I'm an alcoholic? You know, for years, like I was just so like very in like denial because I'm just like I don't have a drinking problem. You know, you know, it took me a while to come to step 1 for sure because I didn't think my life was definitely unmanageable. And I thought I could control my life and my drinking, but you know that is 100% like not true because I was not able to ever stop drinking. There was not one day, 1 second of you know those 20 something years of my life that I was able to either like stop drinking or take a pill or you know whatever other people do these days. But that's what I did. You know you know I was just very cocky and you know, sometimes in my character defects, I still see that come up. But you know, that's just when we work our step 9. You know, I'm just having to keep praying for you know my character defects to be removed, and you know, still continuing to take that action. And you know, only God is able to remove that from me. you know, I just have to remember that, like, when I fall off the beam, because sometimes I'm still like falling off the beam, and because I am not perfect, and just asking God and, you know, surrendering that to Him, because I am definitely not able to do this on my own for sure. Nor do I want to, because I have made a life of my mess. Uh, so yeah, that's. I know I jumped ahead, but that's what I wanted to say, because that just popped up at me, and those are just very two good sentences. So that's all I have.
Thanks, Emily.
Mhm.
You want me to read more?
You want to? Mhm.
Okay. The real significance of my experience in the cathedral burst upon me. For a brief moment, I had needed and wanted God. There had been a humble willingness to have him with me, and he came. But soon the sense of his presence had been blotted out by worldly clamors, mostly those within myself. And so it had been ever since, how blind I had been. In that worldly clamors, I wrote in 2017, I wrote, that's my thinking and my fears. And I see when people come here, I always tell people, get the newcomer number. Don't give them your number and wait for them to call you, because they're going to go home and rethink whether or not they're going to call you. Call them. Call them first. Make that first approach. That's what the book tells us to do. You know, this is about my sobriety, going out to help others. It's not about waiting for them to call me. That's some kind of weird meeting rhetoric that built up somewhere. I don't even know where, but that's not how I was taught. And there it is, right? There had been a humble willingness for a brief moment. When somebody comes here and says they need help, right? That's why I get their number. And if they're willing to give it to me, I know they really mean business, right? And then I reach out to them, and then I don't chase them. I mean, after that, you know, they got to show me they want to do it. But I check on them and say, how you doing? You know, even if I'm not sponsoring or working with them, I check on them. And that keeps me out of me. So, but that worldly clamors, you know, that mostly those within myself. And that's that going back to thinking I don't need God, because I'm busy planning and thinking and solving and managing my life. Let me just read a little bit more, and then Emily, you comment, and then we can open it up. It says, at the hospital, I was separated from alcohol for the last time. Treatment seemed wise, for I showed signs of delirium tremens. There, I humbly offered myself to God, as I then understood him, to do with me as he would. I placed myself unreservedly under his care and direction. I admitted for the first time that of myself I was nothing, that without him I was lost. I ruthlessly faced my sins and became willing to have my newfound friend take them away, root and branch. I have not had a drink since. And that sentence is just, I absolutely love that. Humbly, unreservedly, you know, he talks about his experience in the hospital, the white light experience that he had when everything kind of came to, you know, to him, and he realized, oh my God. I just love this. So over to you, Emily, and then however long you want to talk, and then we'll open it up.
Um, yes, I definitely love the third step prayer for sure. You know, in the past, my sponsor has me like rewriting the third step prayer into like my own words and like praying that daily. So like I replace some of the words, and then I just, you know, plug in whatever I need at that moment in time. I like how it said, "How blind had I been?" Um, you know, I lived that life for like 20 something years, and I was just very blind to the truth. Like, you know, I should have, you know, surrendered long ago, but you know, you're ready when you're ready. And I hit my rock bottom, and then I came in. Um, I definitely love how he broke that down into the third step prayer, because that showed that he was ready, and he was ready to surrender and give it all to the God of his understanding. And I love how it mentioned on page 12, the real significance of my experience in the cathedral had burst upon me. For a brief moment, I had needed and wanted God. You know, that desperation and that surrender. That was me when I finally had decided to surrender and come into the program. And when I first took the first three steps, that's when I knew I was going to be serious about it, and I was just willing and able to do anything to keep a hold of that, you know, through my years of sobriety. And this just again reminds me of you know, when I first took steps 1, 2, and 3. And I love that this can be teachable not only for people that have had long-term sobriety, but people that are, you know, still new into the program. Like, it's definitely versatile for sure. So that's all I have. If we want to open it up, we can. I'll stop the recording.
You guys wanted to open, raise your hands, and if you have any